A man stands before a firing squad at dawn, his legs barely holding him upright, not from fear, but because doctors had spent the previous night pumping poison from his stomach. He had tried to cheat the executioner. He had failed. And now, on a cold October morning in 1945, the former Prime Minister of France was about to pay the final price for one of the most calculated acts of betrayal in the history of the Western world. His name was Pierre Laval, and what he did to children, to thousands of Jewish children rounded up on French streets, torn from their parents' arms, and loaded onto trains heading east to the killing fields of Nazi Germany, is something history has never forgiven, nor should it. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to History of Army, and that's the channel where we go beyond the headlines and dig into the real stories of war, power, and the people who shaped history's darkest chapters. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. We drop new content every week, and today's story is one you will not forget. To understand how Pierre Laval ended up before that firing squad, you have to go back to the beginning, because the tragedy of Laval is not just that he became a collaborator. It's that he was once something entirely different. Born on June 28, 1883, in the small French village of Châteaudun, Laval grew up the son of a cafe owner and postman. Not wealthy, but not struggling either. He was sharp, driven, and hungry for something more. By the time he became a lawyer, he had positioned himself as a fierce champion of the working class, defending trade unionists, fighting for the poor, and building a reputation as a man of the people. In 1909, he married Jeanne Clossat, the daughter of the local mayor, and the two had one daughter together, José, born in 1911. By the 1920s, Laval was climbing fast through the ranks of French politics. Minister of Public Works, Minister of Justice, Minister of Labor. In January 1931, he became Prime Minister of France, and that same year, Time magazine named him Man of the Year. Here was a man at the top of the world, a self-made politician who had clawed his way from a village cafe to the highest office in the French Republic. And then something changed. Power does strange things to people. For Laval, ambition began to swallow conviction whole. In 1935, now serving as Prime Minister for a second time, Laval made a move that revealed who he was truly becoming. When Italian dictator Benito Mussolini sent 200,000 soldiers to invade the East African nation of Ethiopia, a brutal, unprovoked colonial assault designed to avenge a crushing Italian military defeat 4 decades earlier, Laval saw an opportunity. Instead of standing against the aggression, he quietly negotiated a secret deal with British Foreign Secretary Sir Samuel Hoare. The plan? Partition Ethiopia. Hand Mussolini a significant piece of what he wanted. Reward the aggressor. When British newspapers leaked the details of what became known as the Hoare-Laval Pact, the public reaction was immediate and furious. On both sides of the English Channel, citizens were outraged. The plan collapsed. Hoare and Laval was forced to resign in disgrace in January 1936. He disappeared from ministerial politics entirely, but he did not disappear. The fall of France. September 1939. Nazi Germany invades Poland, and the Second World War begins. 8 months later, in May 1940, Hitler's armies pour into France. In just 6 weeks, one of the most powerful nations in Europe is on its knees. The shock is total. The humiliation is crushing. And in that chaos, Pierre Laval resurfaces. He works behind the scenes, whispering into the ears of desperate men, arguing that France must not flee, that a legal, legitimate government must remain on French soil to negotiate with the Germans. His logic sounds almost reasonable. His tone is calm. His motives are something else entirely. On July 10, 1940, where the French Third Republic officially votes itself out of existence, the new Vichy regime is born, led by the elderly World War I hero Marshal Philippe Pétain. And Laval, the man once beloved by the working class, steps into his role as its political architect, appointed Minister of State. He is back, and this time, there will be no limits. Collaboration. Laval's worldview at this point had calcified into something dangerous. He genuinely believed that Nazi Germany had already won the war, that resisting Hitler was not brave, but foolish. In his mind, The smart move was not to fight, but to position France as a valued partner in a new German-dominated Europe. He would play the game, make the deals, and keep France relevant. What he was really doing was delivering France into the hands of its oppressor. In November 1940, Laval began making sweeping decisions without consulting his own colleagues, including handing Belgian gold reserves directly over to German control. It was the kind of unilateral collaboration that shocked even his fellow Vichy officials. In December 1940, he was abruptly dismissed from the government in a sudden internal power struggle. But the Germans wanted Laval back, and what the Germans wanted, the Vichy government delivered. In April 1942, Pierre Laval was reinstalled as head of government. This time, there were no more pretenses, no subtle half-measures. He came back with a mission. The broadcast that shocked a nation. On June 22, 1942, Laval sat before a radio microphone and delivered words that stunned millions of French citizens still clinging to hope. He announced calmly and without apology that he wished for a German victory, because without it, Bolshevism would consume all of Europe. A sitting French prime minister, wishing for the enemy's victory. Live on national radio, this was not a slip of the tongue. This was a declaration of allegiance, and it was followed by action. The deportations. Within months of his return to power, Laval's government began supplying French laborers to Nazi industrial factories. Thousands of French workers were torn from their families and shipped across the border to fuel the German war machine. But the darkest chapter was about to begin. Under relentless German pressure, Laval agreed to participate in the roundup and deportation of Jews living on French soil. Men, women, the elderly, children. And here is where Laval did something that even his Nazi overseers did not initially demand. The Germans had ordered the deportation of adult Jews. Laval went further. He personally insisted that Jewish children under the age of 16 be included in the deportations, arguing with chilling detachment that families must not be separated. When French Protestant leader Marc Bergner urgently warned Laval that these children would almost certainly be murdered, Laval's response was 3 words: "Not one Jewish child must remain in France." Let that sink in. This was not a soldier following orders. This was a politician, a former defender of the working class, voluntarily choosing to exceed the demands of a genocidal regime in order to demonstrate enthusiasm. In total, approximately 77,000 Jews living on French territory were sent to concentration camps and extermination centers. The overwhelming majority died at Auschwitz. 1/3 of them were French citizens. And the children Laval personally made sure were included, were among the most defenseless victims of the entire occupation. The collapse. By 1944, the tide of the war had turned decisively. The Allied landings at Normandy on June 6, 1944, began the liberation of France. Even as German power crumbled around him, Laval kept collaborating. He tried desperately to salvage his position, even attempting to recall the French National Assembly in a last-ditch effort to manufacture legitimacy for himself. It failed. Everything failed. As Allied forces swept across France, Laval fled, first to Germany, where he briefly participated in a ridiculous shadow government on collapsing German soil, then to Spain, hoping the Franco regime would shelter him. It would not. And under intense international pressure from Free French forces, led by Charles de Gaulle, Spain expelled him. American forces arrested Laval in Austria and shipped him back to France. He was going home to face judgment. The trial and execution. The trial of Pierre Laval began on October 4, 1945. The courtroom was hostile, visibly openly hostile. The jury had already decided. When asked about collaboration, Laval looked out at the room and said, "I may be the victim of a judicial crime. I prefer to remain silent." The death sentence was delivered in his absence. His lawyers were refused a retrial. On the morning of October 15, 1945, Laval was prepared for execution at Fresnes prison, just south of Paris. But first, prison staff discovered that he had smuggled poison into his cell, a glass vial stitched inside the lining of his jacket. When he had swallowed it during the night, doctors worked frantically and stomach pumped him back to consciousness. Twice. The poison was old. it had not done its job. A few hours later, 62-year-old Pierre Laval was dragged before a firing squad. His final words, shouted at the top of his voice, were, "Vive la France! Long live France!" The men raised their rifles and fired. His body was buried in an unmarked grave. In November 1945, it was moved to the Chambrun family mausoleum at Montparnasse Cemetery in Paris, where it rests today. No one wept. Pierre Laval remains one of the most despised figures in French history, and rightly so. Not because he collaborated under impossible circumstances, but because he chose to go further than required. He was not a man trapped by events. He was a man who saw opportunity in catastrophe and exploited it at the cost of tens of thousands of lives, including the lives of children. History of Army covers these stories because they matter, not just as distant events, but as warnings. The Pierre Lavals of history are never presented as villains at the start. They begin as promising politicians, pragmatic deal-makers, and calculating survivors. And then one day, they're sending children to death camps and calling it diplomacy. If this episode hit you the way it hit us while making it, subscribe to History of Army, share this video with someone who needs to know this story, and leave a comment below. Tell us what you think. Should Laval have gotten a proper retrial, or did justice find the right man in the end? We'll see you in the next one.